Reddit Ask Me Anything. I am a person living off-grid with her family in Vermont. Ask me anything. We are a family of 4. 2 adults, 2 kids, living off-grid on a self-built homestead in Vermont. I am making jam and canning today. I thought I could answer questions for anyone interested while things simmer on the wood stove. Off-grid equals not connected to or served by publicly or privately managed utilities, such as electricity, gas, or water. Disclaimer: we do have internet before anyone points to the obvious. What's your typical day-to-day life like? Do you spend a large amount of time getting the basic utilities for the day? Our typical day involves a lot of moving water. We start the day moving wood in for the day, getting water for showers and dishes and consumption on the stove in the morning so we have hot water throughout the day. Feeding the fire is a big task, as wood is our only heat source. It gets cold in the winter in Vermont. In January-February, we have to wake up every hour and a half to feed it. There's a lot of baking and cooking. Things are a bit different on a wood stove. On a weekly basis, we spend time weeding the gardens, weeding the orchard, splitting wood, getting wood from our woodlot. There's always a project that disrupts the flow of daily life. You have to feed your stove that often? I only have wood heat too. I die. LOL. In the worst of winter it's usually about every 6 hours. North Ontario, Canada. I couldn't manage without running water either. I have a well and use a generator to pump what I need. You are a brave girl. Will think of you in February. Our wood stove is not very efficient. It's a cook stove first, but it heats the home. We built an addition on our tiny house last year, and now have a second real wood stove. We are hoping that it will burn wood slower. I don't have a job, and we have weird sleeping patterns, so it hasn't really been an issue. We plan on having our sleeping quarters in the living room in the future to be able to feed the stove, to be closer to it. Ask us again in 10 years. Maybe we'll cave and have a generator to pump water. That sounds terrible. Mayo, I'd be so pissed if I was a kid in that family. Involves a lot of moving water. I see that you collect your own electricity. Is there a reason that you don't move water via a pump? We don't have enough power to move water at this point. Husband is designing a way to divert the overflow to the house. It's in the works, at least on paper. Do you go to the store to get food supplies ever? If so, how often? For what? And what changes in the retail industry could be made to make more people less reliant on them? I go to the store all the time, even though the goal is to one day have at least 90% of our food supply covered by our garden's animals. We are at least 5 years away from that goal. We still buy clothes too at thrift shops, and we buy feed for our chickens. We rely heavily on Amazon for weird stuff we would never be able to find. Special tools to build. It has saved us a ton of trips to stores. I don't know about changes in the retail industry. I think society needs to work on overconsumption though. Does Amazon do same day or 2-day delivery to you? Are you far away from a town? 2 days, I think. We are 12 miles from a big town. What do you two do for work? And how do you handle sharing the responsibilities of raising your children? I'm about to have my first child, and I have just got a job as a traveling wind turbine technician. My partner and I are very interested in living off-grid, but a bit apprehensive due to the challenges we may experience being first-time parents. My husband is a science admin. I was a librarian, but quit my job after 8 months of living off-grid. I was enjoying being on the land more than my job. As for sharing responsibilities with raising children, well, we have fallen in our gender roles. I do the cooking, tending the gardens, doing laundry, taking care of the children, and he does the building houses, doing the heavy lifting. It happens slowly, and part of me hates the fact that I am happy in this situation. I was raised by a stay-at-home mom, and vowed to never be just a mom. I have kept a few side jobs for my sanity and to bring a bit of money in. I am a freelance reporter for a local newspaper, do communication for the school in town, and a recording secretary for school boards. Well hell, with that logic, I also enjoy staying home more than going to my job, don't we all? Come to think of it, I'll be off grid too soon if I keep it up. Well, I was also working to pay for childcare. There were other personal reasons, like having a kid with a chronic condition that required me to wake up every 2 hours. It was not sustainable and didn't make sense financially to keep the job. Off-grid just means not connected to public electricity water supply networks, right? Why does everyone think it means homeschooling, not vaccinating, not buying things online? I blame movies and books. I just finished Educated. I think that's what people picture when they think off-grid. Why did you guys decide to keep internet and phones? We are okay with that feature in our life. My husband works in tech and sometimes has to work from home. We are okay with being connected to society in some forms. I'm not OP, but being someone interested in off-grid living. Personally, I see this as not being dependent and someone else works to keep going. Like ITH Electricity in OP case, they still have electricity. They just produce it themselves. Phone and internet can't be done yourself and you don't actually directly depend on it, so it doesn't matters. Are your kids, will they be homeschooled? We have a great public elementary school right down the road. We also speak French at home, and I don't think I have it in me to homeschool. If he is ever discontent with the school, maybe, but at this point, we are very happy. Our town doesn't have a high school, so we are a sending town, which means that you can send your kid to any middle high school you want, and they will pay the tuition. What's the toughest day you've had off the grid? Ever consider grabbing a hotel room for the night? We went to a hotel for 2 nights once because it was too hot, and even though we tried to cool the house down, we just couldn't. Don't try the cooler with ice and a fan trick. It doesn't work, folks. I was breastfeeding at the time and was so dehydrated from the heat I wasn't producing milk. So to the hotel we went for 2 nights. It wasn't really a tough day. The hardest day was probably when I came home from the hospital with a newborn and a section. Barely able to move. Our living arrangements include a lot of physical labor, carrying wood in, feeding the fire. Heck, just taking a shower means carrying water around. It wasn't hard physically because my husband and son were super helpful and I didn't really have to do anything, but it was hard mentally. I questioned a lot why we were doing this, instead of living in suburbia somewhere closer to family. Recovering from execution in those conditions seems crazy. You're not supposed to lift anything for 4-6 weeks, right? And wasn't expecting it to be the heat that got to you in Vermont. Are you planning on staying off the grid for a while? Will you discourage your kids from playing video games, watching movies at friends' houses when they get older? Edit. Crazy, as in really tough. Sorry, I didn't answer the playing video games in the other response. My oldest is 8. He plays Minecraft on the iPad sometimes. All our friends and a lot of his friends in his classroom have the same values as we do. He spends a lot of time outside. And we do too. We do Friday movies on a laptop and watch a movie as a family that day. In the winter, he gets to watch shows on Saturday morning if he wants to. He gets to watch TV and stuff if he is super bored, but it rarely happens. Okay, why are you off the grid? How do you educate yourself on these matters? We wanted to live in Vermont and fell in love with a piece of land without a house on it. We were completely new to building. We had only built a chicken coop prior to our house and had a limited budget. We knew we didn't want to take a mortgage to build, so we went with the most basic cabin we could reasonably build in a short time. We figured we would add features and utilities as money would allow. 5 years in, and we still are fine with not having running water, a constant supply of electricity. We learned everything from YouTube videos, talking to neighbors and friends who have built their own home too. Given that it gets pretty cold in Vermont during the winter, how much wood do you chop for that? Do you buy some, or gather it all yourselves? We gather it on our land. We use about 3 cords, I think. But it's pretty hard to say because we usually run out way before winter ends. And we just cut down ash tree. You can burn it green as we go. This year though, we are starting the season with oak and plenty of maples. We hope one day to have a few years of surplus. One day. I wanted to chime in. As a dad that raised my family, 3 children, off-grid in the Rockies for 5 years, after living in the concrete jungle of Houston, I don't think people understand the ramifications of making a move like that. This is a very hard life, not just for the adults but for the kids. When children get hurt sick, as they often do, they are exacerbated by the increased distance to facilities, lack of facilities. Among other things, kids still have to go to school, and the associated responsibilities, school functions, unless you're homeschooling, not to mention the isolation. While it can bring a family closer, it can also cause a lot of friction. As my off-grid neighbor mentioned to me, "I give you 5 years." When I asked why, he said people tend to fall out of love with the idea of off-grid living between year 4 and 5 inches. I don't regret it, but I definitely wouldn't do it again. We are at year 5 and still loving it. Our son has a chronic condition. We are 30 minutes, 17 once when we drove very fast at 1 AM. From a major hospital that has helicopters too. It was part of the equation when moving to this piece of property. I don't think I could live anywhere else off-grid but here in Vermont. Mainly because I have found my people. I have found friends who have the same values and have kids. We have limited our social events to once a week because we had too many social interactions. We send our kid to public school. I feel like we have the best of both worlds. But I agree, it is hard sometimes. And it can be extremely hard depending on where you are. We seriously considered Alaska for a while. I am glad we didn't. I envy you. I'd like to get to this place in my own life eventually. How did you begin? I'm sure it's not as simple as buying some land and starting the building process. Are there any laws or legalities that I need to keep in mind? We began right where you are today. It took us several years to transition. Life changes don't happen overnight. Although there were a few leap of faith moments. 8 years in, we are at a stage where we feel like our transition is complete. We barely remember what life was before. Laws and legalities vary depending on the place where we are. There is very little that we worry about. We're very free in Vermont to do as we please. That's mostly because what we do happens to not be anything controversial to anyone else. Live and let live. What do you enjoy the most about your lifestyle? Would you want to change anything about your way of living? It's gonna sound super cheesy, but the freedom it gives us to be living very comfortably on one income, and with the hope to not have that income in 15 years hoping to retire early. We also don't have a mortgage, and knowing that no matter what, we have a house, food we can grow, it feels good. I am super anxious about the future. Eco-anxiety I think is the new term. But it feels reassuring to know I am doing my best, and I will be able to tell my kids that. Do you feel you are setting your children up to live a more challenging life given their friends and schoolmates will have different experiences and have more in terms of electronics, clothes, normalized food, etc.? Kids all have a different experience, no matter what their background. We do the majority of the work. His classmates also have wood stoves, etc. His friends also don't have unlimited access to video games and spend time outside. He has a pretty normal childhood compared to his peers. He has 2 parents at home, one who is there all the time, has no financial issues, no food insecurities. They live in one of the safest states in the US. He will do just fine. I'm sure lots of physical labor is involved in every day-to-day living. What are you going to do as you age and time takes its toll on your body physically? That is a very interesting question and one that I think a lot about because I can't imagine having to move out of here in old age. And I see it happen in the community. It's very true that the more we do this, the stronger we get and the better experienced we are at doing it. I know 80-year-old Vermonters who can swing a wood splitting more harder than I can. Equally as true, at some point our bodies will be worn to the point that they just can't do this anymore. Right now we are very much implementing all the projects we want to do on our land, but in about 3 years, they will all be deployed, and all we'll have is maintenance. We'll be at cruising speed, and it will be a perfect time for improvements and automation. Part of these improvements will be for speed, some for ease, and I know very much that a lot of them will be to accommodate for old age. For example, in the house, we're thinking about adding an elevator. We know stairs are torture for older people. There's a spot specifically where I'd like to build some sort of lifting thing. It will need to happen while I'm still young enough to build, and hopefully have a few years for testing and refinements. There's many other things we think about for when we're old. For now they're only ideas. Do you feel pressure from outside to change the way you live? Like local government messing with you or even bigger government? I've heard stories about people trying to go out and live on their own like this, but for some reason someone is always trying to make it harder for them. Not really in Vermont and where we are specifically, but we are worried about development in general as it means higher taxes, more people and thus, more rules. We are worried about the future, that what we are doing now won't be possible for our kids, at least where we are. Unfortunately, growth is seen as a necessary force by many, and lawmakers only add to the books, so things only ever become more restrictive. Deep question. How do you use the computer/internet at home without having electricity? And if you rely on their batteries, where, when, how do you charge them? We have electricity in the form of a homemade solar install. It's gotten a lot better over time as we figured things out. We can power a fridge now. Woohoo. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.